2030. This is Business Morning here on Channels Television, and welcome our viewers here in Nigeria and around the world. Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari has started his second and final term in office, and that was 24 hours ago with his official swearing-in and inauguration, during which Mr. President did not deliver any inaugural address. Since 2019 started, at least 5 African countries have conducted elections and their presidents sworn in. Two of the 5 are the continent's giant economies, Nigeria and South Africa, accounting for nearly 50% of sub-Saharan Africa's in dollar terms. Nigeria, however, has some peculiarities: a huge and still growing consumer population, a weak industrial base, a massive landmass, rising insecurity, hurting the country's food production, corrupt practices, a groaning federal and subnational fiscal balance sheets, among other malaise. So, what is the world view about President Buhari's final lap of presidency? Let's get a first word on this morning after inauguration, and we'll be talking to Razia Khan, who is in our London studios. She's the managing director and chief economist in charge of Africa and Middle East at Standard Chartered Bank of the United Kingdom. Of course, President Buhari did not make an inaugural address. He actually said a few words about the state of the economy and what to expect when he gave his acceptance speech after the February election, and the president says that his new administration will intensify efforts in key areas: security, restructuring the economy, and fighting corruption. Those were the 3 pillars upon which he campaigned for his first time in 2015. He says, quote, "We have laid down the foundation and we are committed to seeing matters to the end. We will strive to strengthen our unity and inclusiveness so that no section or group will feel left behind or left out." That's part of the president's 2-page statement, what you call acceptance speech, on February the 27th, after the election. But yesterday, he did not give any inaugural address. So Nigeria's public holiday yesterday where's one expecting the president to make a speech, but that speech, according to sources, will now be delivered on June 12th, the country's Democracy Day. But a lot of questions are being asked. Where is President Buhari's cabinet? And that will be a very key issue to consider for everyone. The president asked all the previous ministers to hand over to the permanent secretaries on Tuesday, the 28th, and then everyone should go home. He gave a very rousing valedictory, thanking all members of the cabinet for a job well done within the first 4 years, 2015 to 2019. But if President Buhari's nomination and what you call an okay of Godwin Emefiele, the central bank chief, to continue for another 5 years is anything to go by, a number of people believe that the president may have, well, most likely, bring back some members of the cabinet that are outgoing. But as at the moment, no names are being peddled anywhere, and no one is sure what Mr. President will do as far as his new cabinet. So the focus on the economy will be who runs the president's second term with him as he starts yesterday. So let's go to London and check with Razia Khan, who is the managing director and in charge of global research for Africa at Standard Chartered. Razia believes that Africa will continue to grow. That was according to an investment note she wrote early this year. She believes that Nigeria and South Africa will continue to try to get a lot out of the headwinds of the global space, that oil prices or commodity prices in general in 2019 will be in favor of Nigeria and South Africa, and so she expects Nigeria to remain in good books, and the balance sheet to be a little bit good because of oil prices, which of course we've seen around $73 a barrel. Early today, oil prices going back down to a bit, about $68 a barrel. We have a few charts to show you the first 4 years of President Buhari and give us a sense of where we go from here. Let's welcome to the program Razia Khan, Managing Director and, of course, the Head of Global Research for Africa at Standard Chartered Bank in London. Good morning, Razia. It's good to have you on the program.
Good morning.
Thank you very much for coming. So let's get the conversation started. Let's hit the ground running. Now, Nigeria faces quite a number of political and socio-economic problems. Some are old, others are new problems. Can you summarize and put all of this in context for us?
probably the key challenge that the Nigerian economy faces is the very weak rate of growth that we've seen in recent years. Now, this is by no means unique to Nigeria. If we look at trend growth in just about any oil-producing country, post-2014, growth has been weaker. Of course, Nigeria has additional challenges. If we look at wealth levels, they tend to be much lower than in comparable oil-producing economies. There isn't necessarily a vast amount of accumulated wealth that helped Nigeria to see through the decline in oil prices in late 2014. And perhaps most significantly, given the country's population growth rate, per capita income growth in Nigeria has been negative for some time.
Yeah, so this is very interesting. But again, if you look at where we are at the moment, let's bring some charts. Let's look at some of these where the road Nigeria has traveled in terms of the economy, growth, inflation, the exchange rate, the rate of the naira to the dollar, and a bit of the equity. So these are some data, a chart from Bloomberg, which was charted by Bloomberg in the last 1 or 2 days. And I'm sure you can see there. This is Nigeria's growth story over the last 2015 with the economic recession. You can see the bars there. Read this for us, Razia. What's your take?
So what we have seen, of course, is a moderate acceleration in growth. The Nigerian economy seems to be over the worst. Technically, it is not in recession any longer. But the key takeaway still is that if we were to extend the growth picture out even further, there has been a meaningful slowdown in economic growth. Nigeria has, of course, been helped by the stabilization of oil earnings. At Standard Chartered, we are constructive in the oil price outlook both in this year, next year, in the medium term. We expect to see an average of $74 a barrel for Brent crude this year, $83 a barrel over the course of next year, and other things being equal, this should be good for the Nigerian economy. But the real question is, when does proper growth momentum get restored to the non-oil economy? The kind of trend growth rate that we have seen, admittedly, it has improved from the depths of the recession, but growth could be a lot stronger. More meaningfully, if Nigeria is going to have a serious effort at poverty alleviation, there is no known record of any country in history that managed to lift a large proportion of its population out of poverty without necessarily achieving a robust growth rate at the same time. So the bottom line is, the good news, Nigeria's growth has been improving from those very low levels, but it's still not good enough. In order to have meaningful socioeconomic transformation, in order to lift many more millions of people out of poverty, Nigeria needs accelerated growth. And for that, it really needs the non-oil economy to be performing that much better.
One of the things that Nigeria's economy has got battling over the years is inflation. And this is one big elephant in the room for Nigeria's both fiscal and monetary authorities. So if you look at Nigeria's inflation over the last 4 years, President Buhari's first time, you will see this elevation and begin to, well, a bit of deceleration here, if we put that chart there for you. So how important is this? It doesn't look like a mountain, but it looks like a bit of a hill there. Do you think we're seeing this gentle pullback in inflation as something that the administration could leverage on to energize growth?
Well, what we do know is that in the recent past, especially over the course of 2018, there was this slight deceleration in the rate of inflation. The question is, does it go much further? Let's put what Nigeria has experienced in context. In 2016, there was a lot of weakness on the parallel market. 2017, currency reforms, a stabilization of that parallel market rate. The spread with the official rate has now narrowed considerably. These are successes. The mystery, though, is that given that there was a time when a lot more goods and perhaps even services were likely priced off a parallel market rate, with that significant currency depreciation, we didn't necessarily see much more of an improvement in inflation. So the question is, what are the drivers of inflation, and really, what is it going to take? Nigeria's monetary policy has been kept relatively tight in order to support the exchange rate, and one of the successes of recent policy has, of course, been that FX stability, but it has come at a cost. What is meaningful is that even though monetary policy has been tight, we haven't seen more of a deceleration in the inflation rate. Is this because expectations of inflation are just sat at a level where many participants in the Nigerian economy automatically anticipate that inflation is going to be in low double digits? Is there a way to try to change that behavior? Is there a way to try to bring about different price expectations? What sort of messaging might be needed from monetary policy in order to achieve that? Lots of questions. The key feature, though, and we should not forget that Nigeria is due a rebasing, even of its inflation basket, and we're likely to get better granularity in terms of updated inflation measures. This might reveal a slightly different picture.
Yeah, but again, if you put inflation on one hand, and the next to it will be the exchange rate, I'm sure, and the FX market. So the Naira seems to have had a major accident in 2015, and the currency, it doesn't seem to have recovered from that as the chart you're looking at now, Razia, on your TV screen looks like. We've got a very sharp dip down in 2016, found a new level, broke that level, now looking at another support level. So how important is exchange rate and the FX market for Nigeria in President Buhari's second term?
Well, this is where a lot of attention needs to be given to the cost of maintaining a relatively stable exchange rate policy. We know that there's probably a preference amongst Nigerians for a stable currency, little doubt about it. No one likes exchange rate instability. Nobody likes the high inflation that might result from that. But what is the give up in terms of being able to achieve relative stability against the dollar? If we think of a lot of oil-producing economies that do have currency pegs in place, that do peg against the dollar, what this essentially means is that they've got to accumulate a large amount of foreign exchange reserves to make those peg regimes meaningful. And there is, of course, a cost to that. The give up may well be in terms of accelerated credit growth. It is a conscious policy choice. If the opting is for exchange rate stability, and this means you accumulate sufficient reserves to be able to maintain the credibility of what is a quasi-peg regime, then it does mean that what you're giving up is the freedom to allow credit growth to accelerate as much as might be wanted otherwise. What you are giving up is the ability to allow for excessive credit growth, to allow for perhaps a little bit more behind that growth momentum in the interests of a fixed exchange rate. And what Nigerians ultimately have to ask is the cost of that FX stability ultimately worth it in terms of the growth that might be foregone?
The President Buhari's second term will be very interesting, again, Razia, because whatever macroeconomic fiscal outlook the country has will be played within the global geopolitical space. Trade fights, commodity prices, very volatile and very unsure what happens to the global trade positioning and all of that with Brexit and all of that. So what's your outlook here on how this, the president and his new team should play these global headwinds, vulnerabilities and risks that have been well highlighted by the World Bank and the IMF?
We think the best that Nigeria can do is possibly to have a focus on long-term measures that are needed to reduce those vulnerabilities that the economy might otherwise face. There is no getting away from the point, at this point in time especially, that Nigeria is fundamentally very dependent on a single commodity for a great deal of its export earnings. We saw in 2014, early 2015, the damage that can be done when there is reliance on a single commodity. And if the price of that commodity should change because of global factors, because of reasons completely out of the control of Nigerian policymakers, The question that should be asked is, what are the day-to-day things that need to be done to create more resilience in the Nigerian economy? What is policy doing, in effect, to be able to boost diversification prospects? We know that under President Buhari, there has been a strong emphasis on capital expenditure, that there is going to continue to be an emphasis on putting in place the enabling infrastructure. And this is important. It is good that we should see an acceleration in Nigeria's investment rate in order to create the conditions that might facilitate economic diversification in the future. But at the same time, it is equally important to look at policy holistically, to look at every single element of policy and to ask, is this something that really helps the longer-term diversification effort? Because this isn't something that will be achieved or completed in 4 or 8 years. It's likely to take much longer than that. Nonetheless, questions do need to be asked about every specific policy proposal. Does it help Nigeria's diversification in the long term? Does it hinder it?
Well, Razia, President Buhari has just reappointed Godwin Emefiele as the head of the central bank for another 5 years. So the central bank chief came in through the last administration, and technically, unless anything else happened, he will be out leaving the current administration by 2023 to 2024. So what's your outlook on monetary policy and the markets, Nigerian markets, under Godwin Emefiele and whatever President Buhari's fiscal cabinet will be able to do together to bring a better exchange rate, impact on the stock market, help Nigeria to pull back a little bit on foreign borrowings and the price that the country is paying for massive borrowing through treasury bills and naira bonds?
Well, the first expectation, of course, broadly on the part of foreign investors, foreign portfolio investors, on hearing about Governor Emefiele's reappointment is that this likely means the policy of currency stability is going to continue. Foreign investors are more satisfied that this will be the case, but even they realize that some of the costs associated with achieving that stability, and early on, let's not forget that this had to be done in the midst of a crisis. Oil prices had collapsed, Nigerian foreign exchange reserves were pressured. There was a need to do whatever it took to be able to restore confidence, and that generally is what we've seen policy trying to do. Nonetheless, we know that this comes at a cost. If we look at the amount of OMO bills in the stock of OMO bills relative to the cost of the federal government's debt service, there are already concerns around how much the federal government has to spend on debt service relative to the revenue that it's able to collect. And equally, there are concerns around the cost of Nigeria's foreign exchange policy. So even amongst foreign investors who do have a preference for FX stability, Nigeria has been a market of interest. I think there is some conceding that in the second term for President Buhari's administration, we are likely to see much more of a pro-growth focus. Something needs to be done to allow growth to accelerate. There will likely be, alongside this emphasis on foreign exchange stability, there will also have to be an effort to allow private sector credit growth to recover. And this may well be an easing of policy. This may well translate into an easing of policy, but it is important that the inflation outlook allows for it before we see significant more policy steps in that direction.
Okay, so Razia, talking about President Buhari's cabinet for his second term in office, what's your outlook? What quality or type of men and women would you like to see? Do you think the president should go the way of President Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa, squeezing the cabinet a little bit, like Ramaphosa did, the president did last night, from 36 to 28? Do you think that would help Nigeria's fiscal balance, the balance sheet, to be a little bit better on both the federal level and at subnational level? Do you think there's a need for more fiscal prudence? What are you expecting, and who are you expecting on board anytime Mr. President makes this announcement? What would you like to see, Razia?
Well, first of all, given the federal nature of governance in Nigeria, there are, of course, limitations that are likely to be placed and whether cabinet can be reduced very dramatically, if at all. So yes, everyone has looked at the recent precedent of South Africa and President Ramaphosa's efforts to try to cut the size of cabinet. There are fewer ministers. There are a lot more deputy ministers in some instances. And there is still, even for Nigeria, a broad consideration that the cost of governance is something that needs to be addressed over time. Nonetheless, we think that the investor focus is much likely to be on the reform credentials of anyone who is given a key economic portfolio. Plans have been outlined. There needs to be an emphasis on capital expenditure, on infrastructure spending. The hope is that there will be smoother passage of the budgets going forward, that Nigeria will not face a long time before budgets are passed into law and the capital expenditure for the year can get underway. This is going to be necessary to boost growth. But investors will also be looking very carefully at the kind of structural reforms that are proposed by whoever holds those key economic portfolios. There is a long-standing need in Nigeria, given the very weak rate of revenue collection as a percentage of GDP. When it comes to non-oil revenue collection, that has been sub 5% of GDP. There is an urgency towards fixing that. Until Nigeria is able to put together more resources, it is going to be constrained in terms of its development choices. So this will be the key thing, likely to be watched by many investors.
Razia, thank you so much. We appreciate your time this morning. Razia Khan, Managing Director and, of course, the Head of Global Research for Africa and Middle East at Standard Chartered Bank in the United Kingdom. Thank you very much. Have a great day for your first word on President Buhari's inauguration. Let's take a break, everyone. We'll be right back.